This interview is with Michael Dunne of Dunne Insights, a consulting firm specializing in global electric vehicle and autonomous vehicle markets. And I'm going to be talking to Michael about a recent blog post of his, Substack post of his. Welcome to the interview.
Markham, great to be back with you today.
Boy, have you been busy. Just off camera, you were telling me about it. You just got back from a trip and you've been talking to, on the one hand, dealers who around the world who are very interested in getting Chinese brands. And then on the other hand, you've been talking to legacy automakers and suppliers. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I was in Mexico City just a few weeks ago, and then more recently in Spain, both the same takeaways. And that is, if you're a dealer, you're ecstatic about the prospect of securing one of these Chinese brands, whether it's a BYD or an XPeng or a Zeekr. Then on the other hand, if you live in Detroit or Stuttgart or Nagoya, you're a little bit terrified because the Chinese are bringing high quality, low cost vehicles that feature advanced technologies at price points that are basically unbeatable. And that's keeping them up at night. So you've got two kind of realities existing side by side, depending on if you're a dealer, you're happy. If you're a manufacturer, you're not sleeping well.
Michael, I interviewed you about 6 months ago, and we talked about whether or not China had disrupted the global auto industry. And you said emphatically, it is disrupted. Did you think that the situation would change this much in the intervening 6 months?
Absolutely not. It's the pace seems to be accelerating. You know, the Chinese are now, BYD has seven roll-on, roll-off ships, each capable of carrying 7,000 cars. So they're on the ocean as we speak, landing in places all over the world, from South Africa to Thailand, where I was recently, to Indonesia, Mexico, Brazil, Europe. They're invading, pouring into virtually every market in the world except for two, the United States and Canada. So if we're sitting here in North America, we're thinking, has this guy lost his mind? He's talking about the Chinese cars pouring into markets. Where are they? We don't see them. But if you step outside of North America, step outside of Canada and the United States, you'll be stunned to discover just how quickly the Chinese are taking share.
Speaking of North America, let's talk about the third member of the continent, and that is Mexico. And that is sort of the subject of your Substack, which is called China's Next Sputnik Moment. Maybe
Mm.
give us an overview.
All right. So just several days ago here, I live in San Diego, and you can drive down to the border. Many people do this, park your car and walk across the border, which I did. And then from there, it was less than a mile to the nearest BYD dealership. And inside, there's about a half a dozen models, lots of foot traffic, and terrific looking vehicles that are not available in the United States. So it got me thinking, well, what would it take? What if dealers in San Diego or Phoenix or San Antonio said, we'd like to get our hands on those? Could it possibly happen? And this is just speculation, Markham, because you know the import duty on cars built in China coming directly to the United States are now 147%. So that's a showstopper. But what if they're coming in through Mexico? And we've heard President Trump talk about this a lot. I began to think it through. Well, you can today buy that vehicle, the BYD, in Mexico, register in Mexico, get Mexican plates, and drive it across the border, no problem. Immigration's not going to stop you. We see Chinese cars here in San Diego. So what if a entrepreneurial minded dealer here says, I'll take 20 of those or 30 of those? Wow. Suddenly you might see this same kind of flood of Chinese cars into the southern United States. Now, we can expect that DC would people in Washington would not waste any time in sort of trying to stop that. But once you've had dozens and say hundreds of cars come into the United States and people get familiar with them, can you put the genie back in the bottle? That's the question.
One of the issues that was raised when former President Joe Biden slapped on the 100% tariff back in May of last year was that the Chinese EVs also present a security risk. Because he said, imagine these cars were driving around the United States. They could go up to military installations, whatever, and taking, data, audio, video, who knows, and sending it back to China. He said
Hmm.
that's not it's not an unreasonable worry. He said, and that's one of the reasons why we put this on. And so might that not motivate President Trump to move quicker than he would otherwise?
Absolutely. Not only do we have the 100% tariffs in place, which Canada followed, but in addition to that, Secretary Raimondo, Gina Raimondo, before leaving office, just a few days before, earlier this year, put in another layer and said if a car features Chinese software or hardware in it from 2027, it will not be allowed to be registered here in the US for exactly the reasons you just mentioned. Because it's not, look at what happened in Iran when the Israelis were able to infiltrate borders there and work from inside using technology. Look what happened in Russia recently with the Ukrainians being able to very cleverly go inside. Look at what happened with the pagers with was it Hezbollah in Lebanon. So there's ample evidence that if you allow weapons, call them, or cars that could be weaponized inside your country, you're vulnerable. You're opening yourself up to all kinds of possibilities. And that was the rationale for the Biden administration to clamp down as hard as they could. Let's be honest, if they start coming in over from Mexico, the reaction would be swift. But what's interesting is for the first time in my lifetime, in Canada, the United States, there might be a product over there, call it in Mexico or Australia or Thailand or coming from China, that's not available to us in North America. That's interesting. It always used to be the other. We have the best products at the lowest prices, right, Markham? That's been the reality for 50 years. Well, hang on, what if we don't have access to those? Would the American consumer demand it? That's what the Chinese might be betting on.
Now, Michael, you talk to a lot of folks in the industry at the global level, executives and dealers and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when Biden put the tariff on 13 months ago, and I said, you know what? The strategic error here is that China is just going to pivot into the global south, where they'll be welcomed with open arms, where they already have the Belt and Road Initiative, where they're investing in infrastructure in various
Mm-hmm.
countries, a lot of it around the power grid. And I said that China won't even miss a beat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's happened. And it seems like it's accelerating even faster than we might have imagined.
Right. There is a reason for that, Markham, is that China has this playbook called overcapacity, and it's a very controversial word because half of the people in the world will say there's no overcapacity in China. The other, there's overcapacity in China. Okay. By design. We've seen it in solar panels. We've seen it when I was early there. We've seen it in buttons. We've seen it in shipbuilding. We've seen it in drones and batteries. It's a fact that China's strategy is to maximum over capacity at home, creating price wars at home, and motivating people, companies to go global in a hurry. And that playbook has worked very well for China. They're making no apologies for it. And here we go with cars now. So it puts pressure on the United States and Canada. How do we respond to this kind of offensive? And for the time being, our answer is let's put the tariff walls up. The Chinese go, fine, that's fine. We're just going to go to other markets, and they've done so. Now they're the world's largest exporter of cars. But what's the end game? I think tariffs are fine as a sort of buy some time out, but they don't solve the underlying dilemma, the underlying threat to American industry, North American industry is how do we get competitive with the Chinese? That's a big question mark that hasn't been solved yet.
I was mentioning the interview that you and I had done, well, 6 months or so ago, where you said, look, the industry is auto industry at the global level is clearly disrupted. And
Hmm.
what we were referring to there was the work of Professor Clayton Christensen at Harvard, who wrote about disruptive innovations in the 1990s. And he would look at this kind of situation and realize immediately what the disruptive innovation was, which is the electric vehicle and with combining battery and software and so on. And the inability of the incumbents to respond. This is like a classic blockbuster
Classic,
Netflix. It's classic.
classic. Hmm.
One of the fascinating things that you've told me before is that the legacy industry doesn't understand how deeply it's been disrupted.
It doesn't get it yet. And when I travel to Michigan, you begin to understand it. In the past week, I've been to three cities. One was Carmel, California. Another was just outside of Atlanta. And then the third was Detroit. Summertime, beautiful America, comfortable, gorgeous, wealthy, American cars everywhere. I don't see any Chinese cars. What's the big deal? And so we've been lulled into a false sense of security, complacency. Let's just keep this going. That's the mentality, and it's human. Why would we want to tear that down? Feels so good, and yet the world's moved on, and every day that goes by, we're more and more at risk of just falling behind. That's reality.
Are you hopeful that the legacy automakers, particularly the North American or those with operations in North America, will be able to make up ground and become competitive with China?
They have to. They have to feel the intensity, the tenacity of the Chinese. They have to feel some pain, I think, before they really turn the corner. Today, there's awareness and there's sort of a grudging acknowledgement. Yes, we better get our act together. But I don't sense that there's, well, who was it? Andy Grove said only the paranoid survive. Like we need to be ultra paranoid if we're going to survive. And today the sentiment in North America's auto industry is, I just saw a LinkedIn post that said, an executive GM goes, well done, another quarter of strong profits. Yes, you're doing a good job making nice trucks and SUVs, but let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Where will we be in 5 years? And that's hard. It's hard. It's not easy. If the CEO, I'm sure Jim Farley, Mary Barra, they get it. But how do you infuse a sense of urgency in your troops when, hey, we're making money? What's the big deal?
Well, let's talk about some of those companies because, Mary Barra over at GM, I think the consensus is that she's actually done a pretty good job. GM ran into some problems early on.
Mhm.
It sorted out those problems. Now it's got its own chassis design with an integrated battery, the Ultium battery, and they're producing, the Equinox at what, $35,000, which is, in the US. That's,
Admirable.
yeah.
Mhm.
So here, my take on this is that there's absolutely going to be a shakeout in the
Mhm.
in the legacy automakers. Nissan probably won't make it, which I'm not happy about because I've got an Infinity, so
Mhm.
I'm not happy. But whatever, there'll be parts around for a while. But some of those, Mazda maybe will
Mhm.
bite the dust, that kind of.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, you'll see consolidation in the legacy automakers and the ones that will survive are the ones that have the head start now on things like, their own software divisions and what
Mhm.
have you. And I
Mhm.
just was wondering what you thought of that kind of hypothesis,
Yeah.
if you will.
GM had a tough start, a few false starts, but there's a guy named Kurt Kelty that they hired originally from Tesla. He's really good. He's heading up their battery business. They've got a couple of big partnerships now, and products are affordable. They're building those affordable vehicles. We're getting good reviews. Um, it's just, I feel as though, if you ask me, bottom line, I feel like the pace of things. If you ask me about China's secret superpower, it's probably speed. Markham, they move so quickly to design, engineer, develop a new product. Maybe in the West, 4 years. The Chinese do it in two. When they discovered in Europe that their EVs would be subject to tariffs, they pivoted to PHEVs, which weren't subject to tariffs. They don't waste any time. So I think that we're heading in the right direction. We just need to accelerate, move into the fast lane to be competitive with the Chinese.
Well, Michael, I'm looking forward to future conversations about this because this is a sector that's moving so quickly and has so many implications for other parts of the American and Canadian economies. And I'm thinking primarily of oil. I mean,
Yes.
if EVs displace internal combustion engines, then upstream of that is the oil industry. And, right now, Canada and the US are the biggest producers in the world combined.
Yes.
So there
And
could be some major pain coming for the North America.
absolutely. There was, if I think back in 2010, I was at a major summit in Beijing where the minister at the time, a guy named Wang Gang, known as the father of the electric car in China, he gave a talk and he said, we have to move to electric. This is 2010. Why? Because we're importing $100 billion worth of oil each year now. At the time, the largest importer of oil of any country worldwide. Our market's only going to get bigger. We're going to get into serious trouble if we don't change our propulsion system. So he saw that future, and China's really made a plan and executed on. So hat tip to them. Coming back to Canada, I had a question for you. So given all the tumult politically worldwide with regards to tariffs and country to country relationships, Canada followed the United States in putting 100% tariffs on Chinese imports last year. Do you see with the new prime minister that staying in place, or do you think that could go away?
I think it'll stay in place for a while, and here's the reason. Mark Carney has got a PhD in economics from Oxford. He's run two central banks, the only man who's ever done that. And when he's given speeches where he's wearing his economist hat and he starts talking about backward linkages and all sorts of economic development theory, which I'm a little familiar with it, so I got it, but most didn't. So I think that in the bowels of the Parliament building, someplace, wherever the Prime Minister's office is, and just FYI, that's kind of our equivalent of the White House, right? That's
Hmm.
where the staff lives or works. I think there's a plan. And I think that it'll be one of the best thought out economic strategies we've had for a long time. The problem is, if you think the legacy automakers are slow, you ought to see Canada in action.
Uh-huh.
We are very slow and we don't do a very good job of focusing our limited resources. We sprinkle a little bit of money here and a little money there, so everybody's unhappy, but we don't get the kind of results often that we're looking for. And given the pace of disruption here, there's a very good chance that Canada will be too complacent and won't move fast enough. So,
Mm.
in a way, kind of sharing the same concerns that you have for the American economy.
Hmm. That's the what is the paradox or the contradiction is we have living standards, Markham, that are tremendous, just tremendous in so many ways, and it's hard to imagine having to give that up or changing that in order to meet new competition. But if we look at the history of humankind, that's always what there's always someone coming up and saying, I'm going to disrupt you. And the Chinese are that person right now. And they're making no apologies about it. They're like, yeah, we're coming guns a blazing. What have you got?
Clay Christensen wrote about that extensively, about an incumbent response to a company with a disruptive innovation. And he said the incumbent will almost always stick with that product or products that are currently generating profit for their shareholders.
Yes.
And they'll be very reluctant to get out of that and invest in the new technology because they may lose money. They may, at the very best, they might break even. And so what that does is it allows the Netflixes in the door
Yes.
without a response from the incumbent. And next thing you know, Blockbuster's bankrupt. And so that I think we're seeing it in the utility industry, we're seeing it in the oil and gas industry, we're seeing it in the auto industry, and I suspect that there are other large industries in Canada and the United States that share that kind of incumbent mentality. And at the end of the day, that will probably be the thing that causes us the most trouble.
Yeah. And even though you just laid it out beautifully, and even though intellectually I understand it. Your listeners understand it. Everybody understands it. But how to get the dinosaur to jump? How to make that happen? How to recognize that and escape that eventuality? That's what's in front of us right now.
This is an existential crisis for the West. We
It
just
is.
haven't recognized it yet, and we are kind of like Britain at the end of World War II, or the beginning of World War II, maybe is the better comparison,
Mhm.
where we go in, got a fair amount of strength, but lots of weaknesses, and the conflict, in this case, the competition, exposes. We're basically the tide goes out and we're caught swimming naked.
Right.
Michael, thank you very much for this. Always love talking to you, man. We'll
Yeah.
look forward to the next one.
Tremendous. Thank you for having me.